Lawful disclaimer and notice of intent. This podcast and all related content are created, owned, operated, and sponsored exclusively by me, the sole author, speaker, and producer. Any other product, service, and/or entity, living or non-living, which may be discussed, displayed, and/or somehow given attention on this podcast is not and has never been an endorsement, advertisement, support, and/or any other kind of validation for its existence in any capacity, nor at all intended to at all facilitate its continued existence in any capacity. I mention things on what I consider to be an as-needed basis to fulfill what I consider adequate as evidence in my best attempt to prove the reality of who I am and what this podcast is attempting to achieve to clearly demonstrate what I consider to thoroughly substantiate my assertions. I act simultaneously in private and public capacities, and this podcast reflects my direct and autonomous expression. It is created and published from within Canada, but is intended for a global audience, including legal jurisdictions in the United States and all common law nations. All statements, views, and narratives presented are based solely on my personal experiences, perceptions, and understanding of the reality I am facing, including ongoing egregious defamation, targeted harassment, and credible threats to my safety and life. I do not and never have claimed that my views aren't extremely, if not completely, accurate interpretations of objective reality, particularly given the information I had access to at the time that I may have expressed them. I explicitly and permanently do not consent, have never consented, and will never consent to any entity, living, non-living, artificial, institutional, governmental, spiritual, and/or otherwise, claiming and/or exercising any agency, ownership, and/or representation over me, my will, my name, my voice, my life story, my spirit, and/or my creative works, in whole or in part, under any conditions or interpretations in any time or place. Any such attempt is non-consensual, void ab initio, and constitutes an ongoing violation of my dignity, rights, and autonomy. Any possible exceptions will be extremely clearly, explicitly, publicly named by me and have the exact scope of my consent well defined on this podcast. For example, in the case of me hiring an attorney to represent me as part of a formal legal process, taking action on a notice of intent provided by this podcast. I affirm my right to spiritual integrity, mental sovereignty, and bodily autonomy, as protected under Section 2A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. Any targeting of my being, including but not limited to through esoteric, psychic, spiritual, occult, energetic, and/or AI-enabled means is deemed non-consensual harm, spiritually violent coercion, and an attack on my right to exist as a sovereign being. I affirm that this podcast, in part, serves as a lawful, peaceful assertion of spiritual self-defense. This podcast is non-fiction and reflects a serious public and ongoing documentation of systemic and targeted defamation, personal and professional sabotage, attempted narrative hijacking, psychological abuse, reputational terrorism, and threats to my physical and spiritual safety, including credible indications of attempted murder and contracted harm by and or on behalf of powerful individuals and or groups. I affirm that this documentation is expressly created for evidentiary use in formal legal proceedings, including those under the jurisdiction of U.S. Federal Court and Canadian Superior Courts, and any international human rights and or public accountability processes. I affirm this is not and never has been intended as role-playing, flirting, and or entertainment of any kind. I accept no liability, moral and or legal, for any third-party misunderstanding, reinterpretation, misuse, and or misrepresentation of this content, whether fully conscious and intentional or otherwise, particularly including but not limited to by AI systems trained on this content without my explicit public consent, commentators, influencers, or institutions attempting to weaponize this podcast, and individuals acting under false pretenses and or covert affiliations. Only the clear, explicit language of this release and any subsequent public communication directly issued by me shall be considered authoritative, accurate representations of my thoughts, feelings, intent, and the reality of my overall state of existence. In any case of clear direct conflict between statements I've explicitly made across different releases on this podcast, the most recent of such, that being the one contained in the latest publicly visible release available containing such on this podcast, should be considered applicable. In such cases, only what is explicitly stated is at all applicable, and absolutely no implications should be assumed about any changes regarding any somehow relevant details and or anything else under any circumstances. All creative, expressive, and narrative content within this podcast is my sole and original intellectual property. I retain all moral rights as author and subject, all economic rights unless explicitly transferred via my public agreement to do so, and the right to veto any derivative, distorted, and or manipulated version of my work and or story. I do not have and have never had any obligation or debt of any kind to any entity to create or release anything on this podcast or anywhere else at any point in time. No other party, living or non-living, holds and or may claim credit, authorship, and or interpretation rights over my expression. I affirm that no valid, public, verifiable evidence exists to dispute these facts. This podcast is not and has never been intended as an endorsement of terrorism or violence in general. However, it should be especially carefully understood that various forms of not necessarily corresponding violence tend to be an inevitable consequence of extremely intense, meticulous, extensive, prolonged terrorism, and it's very much intentional for this podcast to demonstrate extremely clearly that my usual aversion to violence due to my typically gentle nature is not something that has boundless understanding, patience, empathy, or will persist more or less absolutely unconditionally for any reason. I've always wanted and done my very best to ensure it's extremely clear that at all creating, enabling, and or facilitating the perpetuation of narratives at all in contradiction with my official position that is objectively extremely clearly established on this podcast is not, never has been, and never will be what I've been trying to achieve with this podcast or in general in any of my efforts at any point in time. I do not and never have intentionally incited terrorism, including but not limited to violence, blackmail, and or coercion. I affirm my fundamental intent as peaceful, lawful, and self-defensive. However, targeted campaigns to stalk, defame, threaten, impoverish, silence, spiritually attack, and or physically harm me will be treated as conspiracies to commit grievous harm and or murder. This podcast is an affirmative public notice of my unambiguous non-consent and a lawful response to sustained systemic abuse. While my fundamental intent in communicating in general through any means is not and has never been malicious in nature, I affirm it can, will, and should exert malicious influence upon anything operating with malice towards me and or this podcast, especially more so the more demonstrably I'm proving that malice exists. And it should be understood that any situation where I continue not to extremely clearly receive any compensation or reward I'm willing to accept is effectively, absolutely, unconditionally an increase in the severity of that malice. I've created the entirety of this podcast under extremely harsh circumstances that I've always believed and asserted are entirely unjust for me to be left in, given the reality of who I am. Circumstances of my existence, including but not limited to my current housing status, financial vulnerability, and material limitations, do not and cannot invalidate my legal personhood, expressive rights, and or entitlement to protection under law. I reject any attempt to diminish my credibility and or rights on the basis of poverty, social class, and or housing insecurity in accordance with Section 7 of the Canadian Charter, the Due Process Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and international law prohibiting discrimination on the basis of economic status. Despite the extent I've irrefutably exposed the truth surrounding a conflict that should have been so extremely obviously recognized as extremely serious to the point that my efforts on this podcast should have made a substantial difference in my life long ago, my life circumstances continue to not have meaningfully or clearly improved at all whatsoever. I still have not ever received any compensation or reward of any kind whatsoever for any of my efforts at all involving the conflict being addressed by this podcast, neither directly nor indirectly from any source. I am, always have been, and always will be absolutely unconditionally unwilling to ever at all accept any compensation or reward whatsoever, directly or indirectly, that at all compromises my integrity, whether directly or indirectly. I do not, never have, and never will consent to it being at all considered to be me and or any entity operating at all with my consent and or best interests regarding any communication somehow claiming and or implying that I somehow do ever have and or ever will unofficially support any kind of position at all contradictory with what I've said on this podcast. This disclaimer and notice of intent supersedes any and all contrary interpretations, explicitly including any and all unauthorized claims therein made against me. I reserve all legal, expressive, spiritual, moral, and intellectual rights without limitation. Any attempt to silence, reinterpret, discredit, and or co-opt this documentation shall be treated as malicious bad faith conduct and may be cited in formal legal proceedings as evidence of further targeting. I'll still provide evidence for what I can later on in this release, but I don't really have any evidence for most of what I'll say this time that I can solidly present here right now, partially because a lot of it happened long ago, and partially because it's extremely difficult to prove others' feelings and gather extensive evidence of their personal lives to connect everything, even if you could provide irrefutable evidence of them doing certain things to you. But I really feel like I'm still extremely brutally trapped in a prison, being chained by extremely extensive, egregious spiritual exploitation of me, entirely against my consent, to my detriment, by multiple entities I've never even mentioned before on this podcast. I consider all such instances to be egregious violations of my rights and to be criminal in nature. I'll present my perspective on things and how I've been left feeling with various occurrences in my life, mostly that I don't feel the need to go into complete detail talking about. I'll just say what I sincerely hope should be fully adequate to fully protect myself from any negative impact the energy could ever have on my life ever again. I've never been the type to go complain about every little thing I've ever experienced that hurt me somehow in my life to anyone. So this is actually the first I'll be sharing a lot of this information with anyone. I'm putting it online, publicly, outright, because there's no real compensation anyone can offer me, no real fault of my own, and no personal reason that would compel me to try to hide it and retain some kind of personal life, especially at this point when I'm in such extreme life-threatening deprivation and literally nothing and nobody really feels pleasant, safe, or as if they truly have any actually good intentions towards me at all. To start, I'm publicly announcing that moving forward, I will never be accepting any gifts, whether it's cash or anything else, from any complete strangers, including but not limited to all those involved in the incidents I'll be mentioning here. From now on, whoever it is and however and whatever they approach me over, I will have to politely refuse it and simply tell them I don't know them. I don't know why they're trying to give or offer me whatever it is they're approaching me over, and I refute any involvement in whatever compelled them to try to offer me anything. And I don't want or need them or anyone else they're involved with to try offering me anything else ever in the future either. I affirm that the only reason I've ever accepted any gifts from complete strangers or even staff of buildings I might frequent who perhaps aren't complete strangers to me at this point is due to the level of extreme deprivation I've been in, as I've described, never out of any desire to enable, facilitate, and or at all generally validate any unlawful or even simply dishonest activity they might have been involved in somehow. So, first off, just a couple days ago, there was a random person I've never seen or heard of before, a complete stranger to me, who approached me while I was digging through one of the trash cans I regularly search for food. She literally just gave me $5 and said to take care of myself and walked away. It felt kind of off somehow, but I really couldn't explain why, and I didn't think much of it at first. But shortly after, literally within an hour or so, I noticed an egregious violation of my energy utilizing the Arabic language, suggesting to me that my biological father had some kind of heavy involvement in whatever ultimately led to that complete stranger randomly approaching me so strangely. Nothing I've been doing has been intended to try to manifest receiving random small amounts of money from complete strangers, and I feel the need to explicitly state that my accepting that money certainly was not intended as any kind of seeing and or accepting an apology from anyone from my past, including but not limited to anyone I've ever mentioned on this podcast. At this point, I suspect the woman was an undercover government agent trying to fabricate evidence to validate false narratives that attempt to justify wrongdoing she's involved in, attempting to cover up having been done to me that she's directly involved in somehow. I also find it strange that a different, complete stranger, a male I'd never seen before, also randomly gave me $5 while I was digging through the same trash can literally just a day or two prior to that as well. And again, it wasn't something I was particularly trying to manifest or would have otherwise associated to any kind of hidden significance to anything. I'd normally assume such things were random acts of kindness. The first time, I didn't notice any apparent violation of my energy either, otherwise I would have refused the money the second time. It's literally only $5. It could never be worth any hassle of dealing with energetic violation at this kind of stage in my life. Aside from those increasingly strange occurrences, perhaps even more blatantly strangely, I also very recently encountered an older blonde white woman, another complete stranger to me who I'd never seen or spoken to before, who decided to randomly give me food and socks. The first time, she just left a bag around my belongings because I wasn't even there to reject it or communicate with her about it, and she later came and talked to me and introduced herself. Even more strangely, she decided to leave even more things for me with the staff of one of the buildings I frequent just today, and this kind of random kindness seems exceptionally strange to me. In all my years of homelessness and experiencing random acts of kindness here and there, I've never experienced something as strange as this. I have extreme difficulty believing some random stranger just so happens to be so eager to help me out all of a sudden for what she basically claims is no real reason suddenly, as I've started really cleaning up my energy and feel I'm getting closer and closer to starting to actually get the kind of respect and recognition I deserve. It creeped me out so much that I had to think about it. The lady seemed nice, but it just feels off. She said her name is Lori, but I'm not trying to gossip about her or attack her, and she didn't actually do anything blatantly harmful towards me for her to deserve to be attacked either. Reflecting on the only Lori I've ever somehow knowingly been connected to, there was a girl named Lori I knew of in elementary school who was also a blonde white female, who I now feel was likely involved extensively in lying and sabotaging my connection with the first person I ever actually genuinely felt and expressed serious intimate feelings and desire towards. It was a girl named Kathy, who was actually one of the very few Asian women who attended the elementary school I attended for most of my earlier years of formal education. To me, it seems as if the Lori I attended elementary school with was somehow massively misrepresenting herself as somehow more desirable to me than Kathy for whatever reason. Very much false, and I never at all wanted, needed, intended, and or had any willingness to tolerate such a thing, but I was also never made aware of it happening, and I never saw any compelling reason to feel Kathy actually liked me for me to even really consider trying to deal with whatever gossip, drama, or whatever exactly it was that her and her friends, of which that Lori was a part of, were involved in. I really don't feel the need to extensively elaborate on every personal experience that traumatized me in elementary school, but let's just say there was no shortage of me being bullied for my feelings for Kathy. Many instances involving her herself directly humiliating me and being extremely cruel to me in general for no good reason. That same Kathy actually also ended up attending the same high school I went to, and I just completely ignored her since I told myself I'd never let myself get humiliated like that in high school, and I was going to be a different person. I remember at one point in high school, she tried to have this really strange attitude and conversation with me. Like, she was all like, "Oh, we're cool now, right? You moved on, haha," as if she didn't hurt me extremely badly, while I imagined she clearly knew it obviously wasn't okay with me. I just stared at her for a moment with a serious expression silently and walked away. I never spoke to her all throughout high school. I decided to voluntarily unfriend everyone on Facebook and delete the only Facebook account I've ever really had many years ago. But years prior to that, quite some time after high school had already ended, I actually had Kathy as a friend on Facebook, and I randomly decided to message her one day on it and told her that I'd felt suicidal back in elementary school, and basically she was the reason I didn't kill myself. But I actually lied. She was never the reason that kept me going. My feelings for her at the time, all those years ago, were genuine, but I never enjoyed any of the humiliation and distance, and admitting the feelings I once had for her back then actually only really made my already extremely difficult life dealing with abuse at home from my biological mother even worse. The reason I sent Kathy that message years later was because I suspected she was hiding important information from me knowingly that resulted in her attention-seeking and fake behavior the entire time she was ever in my life. So she might have known something that could have given me closure about it, which I really wanted and even felt I needed to truly be able to put all the hurt from my earlier school years behind me, of which she was certainly no small part of contributing to. But she never told me any such thing. She basically just told me thanks, like she got a huge ego boost, and that was it. So whatever drama or gossip or malicious manipulation of narratives she was involved in enabling, facilitating, and likely to some extent herself creating around me, she intentionally kept it entirely hidden from me, even well after high school had ended, and even knowing it's very possible and perhaps even quite likely that I might literally commit suicide over it. That's how I personally feel extremely confident that she was always extremely selfish, attention-seeking, and fake in how she dealt with me all throughout elementary school and in relation to whatever she did in high school. If we go with the concept of those with similar names carrying an energy extending influence of prior individuals that have hurt me somehow, this extends into the fact that there actually was a different woman, also named Kathy, who I actually was quite good friends with in high school, who I believed had no friendship or otherwise association with the Kathy I knew in elementary school. That other Kathy ultimately behaved in an increasingly blatantly trashy manner that eventually made it evident to me she just hung around me for attention, cruelly pretending to enjoy flirting with me in front of others, even going to the extent of trying to mess around with the idea of having children with me in this creepy, almost forceful manner that came off extremely fake and bad vibes to me. I don't know or care whether or not she actually wanted kids with me, but her clear disregard for my visible lack of desire for kids that I'd showed to have, not just with her but in general, was increasingly disturbing to me as she escalated it towards the end of high school. Ultimately, she went as far as secretly becoming friends with Gracia after they happened to go to the same university. At one point, I ended up actually visiting her, and out of nowhere, she suddenly revealed to me that she was close friends with Gracia, and she invited Gracia over to her room. It was so awkward, and I was certainly not prepared for it, nor did I visit her wanting it to happen, or even knowing Gracia went to the same university. Given everything I'd experienced, I felt even more disturbed at the extent of false pretense I could only imagine went behind the situation that had clearly intentionally been hidden from me, where these women were clearly trying to control and trap me in some kind of situation where I'd be forced to have kids I never wanted with someone that was coming off increasingly clearly to me only ever really wanted to involve herself with me for ulterior motives. After that, I completely cut out that other Kathy from my life as well, and I haven't spoken to her ever again to this day, and I don't want to either. And I certainly don't want to talk to the Kathy I met in elementary school either. I want to put all of this behind me. Reflecting more on my recent experiences relating to that older complete stranger who said her name was Lori, and what memories it reminded me of, combined with how Kimmy happened to have dyed her hair blonde when I met her, and certain spiritual things I've been noticing, I recall a memory going all the way down to young childhood. There was a blonde white girl named Alexandria that attended the same school I went to when I was really young. I don't remember exactly, but it was like kindergarten or grade 1 or something. Recently, I've started seeing spiritual indications she's actually been violating my energy extremely badly, entirely against my consent, to my detriment. When I was still very young, I initially hung out with her a bit, and I guess some might say it was a sort of romantic thing, but we never did anything sexual, not even holding hands. I never even really wanted to, because while I wouldn't say she was ugly, I never found her especially attractive either. It was more just a proximity and convenience thing that she gravitated towards me, and I didn't feel the need to aggressively reject her, largely neutral overall, and ultimately rather short-lived presence in my life. That energy to this day seems to be attempting to act like she's teaching me things I want, need, and or have any willingness to tolerate her misrepresenting me, as if to consent to her acting like should be communicated to me through her. In reality, it's completely useless information to me that seems to only really be feeding off what I'm doing and representing it for selfish gain, entirely against my consent to my detriment, in what I basically just find to be rather substantially annoying and a complete waste of my time and energy. Going back to my more recent personal experiences, I very recently was approached by 2 males I've never seen before and never spoken to before in my entire life. They asked me if I'm homeless, to which I answered honestly with a yes. Essentially, I learned they were trying to figure out what my favorite candy is, and they offered to buy it for me, although I saw reason to suspect they possibly in reality intended to steal it for me. I don't know or care whether they would have bought it or stolen it or some combination of both, or if they would have obtained it somehow else. I've never told anyone what my favorite candy is, and I have no want, need, and or willingness to do so anytime foreseeably soon, if ever. I also never wanted to try to get anyone to steal anything from me, or even possibly purchase anything for me, with ulterior motives or weird hidden narratives as if we have some kind of secret connection with each other. Which is why I respectfully declined their offer to get me candy, even though they insisted they'd purchase it legally and wouldn't steal it. I see reason to suspect that incident related to the one or more individuals I believe were murdered against my consent to my detriment by egregious misrepresentation of the reality of my life and efforts, the same case of murder that I suspect systemic involvement in attempts to have me murdered in real life as some kind of justice for. As I mentioned in the last release on this podcast, this incident was effectively forced upon me in front of a camera of a building I know the staff of. And I have no issue with testifying in a formal courtroom over it, if necessary. I don't know those people and don't want to get to know them. Also, I've seen indications in my energy that I'm being further subjected to egregious defamation of me entirely against my consent to my detriment that's attempting to misrepresent me as having had addictions and reckless behavior in the past that I've overcame, perhaps especially in relation to false narratives that I have something to be ashamed of or that I'm still running from to some extent. Perhaps this ties into my subhuman filth blood relatives I talked about in the past. Both my biological parents have egregiously misrepresented me as being a drug addict many times right to my face and to my biological brother, and probably also others, merely because they know I've smoked cannabis before in my life, and I have no issue admitting it's certainly been substantially more than just once or twice. I've also tried various other substances throughout my lifetime, but I don't currently consume cannabis or any hard drugs, nor have I ever for a long time now. Although I've tried many different drugs before, I've never been ashamed of it. I just don't necessarily encourage people to do drugs, and I don't feel the need to, brag about it or something. I've never been addicted to anything, and not just drugs, but never to sex, gambling, partying, or anything else either. As for how I exposed my biological father for being a gambling addict recently, perhaps I should mention that I myself have hardly ever even messed around at all with gambling of any kind in my entire life, and attempting to prove that point about roulette to my biological father was by far the most I've ever researched and interacted with gambling of any kind. I didn't enjoy it, and I haven't messed with roulette and or any other kind of gambling at all ever since. Also, I do not have and have never had any side hustles. There's absolutely zero real evidence to at all prove otherwise. I've seen reason to believe that my biological mother is still egregiously violating my energy, even after my last release on this podcast. Accordingly, I suspect my biological father has at least attempted some kind of destiny swap behavior with her as well, and he's also still attempting to dump some kind of karma for that on me entirely against my consent to my detriment. I also suspect my biological mother has at least attempted some kind of destiny swap behavior on my biological father too, and she's herself also attempting to dump some kind of karma for that on me entirely against my consent to my detriment. I don't believe anyone from my past, or Kimmy and all her associates and everyone else on my mailing list as well, are at all sorry about any harm they've ever inflicted on me. Me admitting ever having had feelings for certain people isn't me pursuing or accepting an apology of any kind from any of them. I'm simply stating the reality and cutting off any false narratives about me they might be trying to perpetuate by misrepresenting me in relation to things I address. I'm trying to break out of the spiritual prison they've tried to keep me trapped and dying in forever. Also, while I talked about the kind of mindset everyone should strive for and how they deal with ego, that doesn't mean everyone should necessarily share preferences, desires, and or experiences I have, in case that wasn't clear. I wasn't trying to dictate to anyone how to live their lives, only what I perceive to be an objectively sound, fundamentally holistic view on objective reality. You don't have to agree, I just believe you're wrong and stupid if you don't. And you can believe I'm wrong and stupid for thinking that. It is what it is, I guess. Since I've affirmed my protection, elevated my spiritual standing to a state of effectively infinity aura, and I'm now at the point where I will utmost savagely, unapologetically expose and decimate the existence of any and every entity that ever at all attempts to restrict me with any extent of what is effectively defamatory, non-consensual deceit, knowingly against my consent to my detriment ever again. I should also expose the full relevance of the Max identity that, if you paid close attention, you'll notice I extremely carefully addressed initially as something that nobody without some kind of extremely warped intent, heavily involving political and sexual exploitation, should have any inclinations towards associating with me. Actually, there was a time I contacted someone and called myself Max. When I was initially flung into homelessness about a decade ago, after my biological father threatened to murder me in front of my biological brother and effectively kicked both of us into homelessness after he finished exploiting us for a court case against my biological mother for RESP funds he wanted to spite her by depriving her of retaining access to. I see no adequate reason to provide any insights into why exactly, and absolutely nothing and nobody knows other than myself, but among the very limited times I've actually had sex in my life, I called myself Max when contacting the escort I contacted who I hoped to lose my virginity to. From the pictures I saw online, she looked distinctly Korean to me, although perhaps not fully so, although clearly fully Asian. She looked more physically attractive to me than nearly every person I'd ever seen in my life up to that point, someone I'd say easily falls under one of the most physically attractive beings I could ever fathom existing. The name she had listed where I saw her was Alice, although I knew that must be a fake name, since it makes sense for her to lie about her name. While being an escort, I only found it appropriate to lie about mine as well, so I see no fault in myself for doing so, and neither can she and or anyone else as far as I'll ever be concerned. When I arrived at the place she gave me to go to, she opened the door. After we made our way into the room we were supposed to have sex in together, and I paid her what she was asking for in the listing, she disappeared to put it away, like escorts usually do. But before she left the room, she shut the lights off, leaving the atmosphere dimly lit and difficult to really see in. But it was my very first time dealing with the process, and I imagined each escort might do things a little differently, and it might have just been to enhance the mood. So I didn't think much of it at first. But the woman that emerged after a while didn't look quite like the woman I'd initially seen and wanted to have sex with. It looked more like her supposedly fully Japanese roommate that was also mentioned on the same listing I'd seen, which was strange to me since I specifically told Alice that she was the one I wanted, even when I initially contacted her. But the woman that was in front of me was still quite physically attractive to my tastes, and certainly not incapable of providing me with sexual pleasure I'd be able to quite substantially enjoy. Plus, I didn't want to cause a scene and potentially get myself and or others harmed, given that there probably was someone with a weapon present nearby that I was aware even back then that an escort likely keeps around as protection, so I didn't argue or resist the advances of the woman that was in front of me at that time. Long story short, we had sex, and I lost my virginity to that woman. I left quite disappointed that I didn't get to lose my virginity to the woman I actually wanted to lose it to, but still overall not really regretting losing my virginity in general, and at least to a reasonably physically attractive Asian woman. I actually reached out a second time for another experience. Once left me wanting more, and how I was very frugal with spending my welfare funds left me feeling comfortable with the cost, especially since I was also staying at a shelter at the time and didn't even really need to spend any of it on food. The second time, I was also greeted by Alice, but the room she led me to was different. It was the one beside the room I originally went to, and it was well lit. She was also the one who re-emerged after taking the payment from the room. Long story short again, we had sex. I asked her what her ethnicity was, and she said she's actually half Korean and half Chinese. Didn't bother me. She was extremely physically attractive to me, and it's not like there was some specific reason she absolutely had to be fully Korean. I've always found Korean, Chinese, and Japanese women more physically attractive in general than all others, and among those, if I had to pick one as my second favorite after Koreans, I'd say it's probably Chinese women. That woman was substantially more physically attractive than most fully Korean or fully Chinese women I'd ever seen, and she's easily by far the most physically attractive mixed race woman I've ever seen and probably can even fathom ever existing, so I really wasn't bothered that she wasn't fully Korean. Anyways, I opened up a bit to her because I figured why not, and towards the very end, she told me she doesn't want children, to which I told her I don't either. I don't know if she was lying or not, but I certainly wasn't. I used a condom and it didn't break, just like any other time I've ever had sex, so I've never seen any good reason to believe I would have impregnated her, and I've certainly never wanted, needed, been willing to tolerate, and or given anyone any even remotely adequate reason to believe I ever have and or would to at all represent, embody, and or endure any burden upon any potential offspring that woman may or may not ever have. I haven't spoken to her since then, and I have no idea what happened to her. I've never been trying to reconnect with her either, especially since that'd probably just be extremely creepy, stalkerish behavior, even if I wanted to, and I'd rather not behave like that. I recall she told me she was about 2 years older than me, so if she's still alive and wasn't lying to me, she's right around Kimmy's age right now. Anyways, I'm on a spree exposing things, so here's some more. Steven, known online as Destiny. I've seen things spiritually that seem to indicate to me that Steven's energy is heavily cooperating with Lena's energy to extremely aggressively attack me. Probably because I'm exposing him for not being quite as much of an upstanding citizen as he likes to portray himself with his extensive political rhetoric. Although I'd never attempt to combat him in that field, he's clearly not the one writing a lawful disclaimer and notice of intent like I have, so clearly he's rather egregiously disregarded my merit to be worthy of a conversation in the past when he dismissed me as an unhinged, crazy stalker loser. But let's get back to the energy reading I was doing. For various reasons, I suspect Lena is actually either half Chinese and half Japanese, or more likely fully Chinese, not fully Japanese as she appears to be attempting to publicly portray herself to be. Of course, I can't confirm this without credible DNA testing on her, and I also don't particularly care, so I'll simply clearly state that I'm guessing her ethnicity, not attempting to state my perspective on it as irrefutable fact and include that I suspect Lena's exploiting her ethnic background to attempt to manipulate Stephen for her own selfish gain at my expense against my consent. I suspect Stephen is also exploiting his political ties to manipulate Lena for his own selfish gain at my expense against my consent. I suspect there's some kind of project they're attempting to start, likely heavily involving exploiting my energy together, trying to force me to do something for them, as if I owe either of them anything for reaching the standing I have, while in reality that's completely false and has always been completely false. I suppose that fabricated indebtedness they've collectively been attempting to manufacture me having towards them, in order to exert extremely unfair control over my existence, substantially relates to the murder of one or more individuals in real life who I've been getting framed for, particularly that which I mentioned in my last release I suspect includes someone I actually have no real connection with, apart from perhaps having encountered them in person a limited number of times within my vicinity due to me being outside 24/7 due to my entirely undeserved homelessness that I suspect both Lena and Stephen to be quite substantial factors influencing the ongoing perpetuation of at this point. There's actually also something especially strange to me about Lena that I haven't mentioned before, but I won't refrain from addressing it now. In the past, many years ago, there was a Twitch streamer named Macaroonies who I knew, who said her name was Lena, said a little differently than this Lena Lemon. We were basically friends for a bit, and even though she quit streaming, we'd still talk sometimes on Discord or Snapchat since I'd actually used those back then. We never did anything sexual, and I didn't hide my feelings in pursuit of Kimmy from her at all. She basically just asked me to help her with her computer science homework a couple times since she was getting a degree in that field, and I'd help her since she knew of my coding skills and needed help. I never asked her for or expected anything from her in return. It reached a point once where she disappeared and basically ghosted me for over a year, and then one day suddenly out of nowhere reappeared and started messaging me on Discord again. The very first time she was just polite and asked how things were going, but then she contacted me again the next day asking for coding help again. At that point, I really just felt like she was using me, and I didn't want to be her friend anymore. I helped her one last time. A while after, she messaged me and basically started arguing with me about my connection with Kimmy and tried convincing me to give up on Kimmy, calling her a slut and whore and stuff. I was quite upset at this and found it especially controlling and abusive and strange, especially since I thought she understood she'd made it rather evident to me that she herself was a trashy slut and whore and was just messing around exploring her options, at best treating me no better than Kimmy was, and in reality perhaps even worse. I pushed back respectfully and refused to abandon Kimmy, and then she disappeared again. I didn't reach out to her at all, just deleted her as a friend and stopped talking to her, since I was done being used by her and didn't appreciate her strange behavior. She randomly tried adding me as a friend again sometime later, to which I just blocked her, never spoke to her or heard from her since, and I never wanted to either. With how abrupt and strange her suddenly popping up in Kimmy and Jamie's content as I progress this podcast is, I suspect it's possible that the Lena Lemon and the Lena I once was friends with are the same person, and she's basically tried to rob me of my soul and destiny swap with me so extremely aggressively that she's literally reinvented herself and basically become reborn under a new identity, trying to completely avoid any real accountability for what was likely also extremely shady behavior she inflicted on various other people like she did to me. I really don't know for sure, and I'm not trying to slander Lena Lemon, but I want to make it extremely clear that I'm not at all afraid of her if she is that person I was once friends with, and she has absolutely zero real ability to appease me, force me to shut up, change my position, or offer anyone any real leverage over me. Nor has she ever had any even remotely adequate reason to believe otherwise. I do not, never have, and never will consent to anyone destiny swapping with me at all, and Lena Lemon is most certainly no exception, whether or not she's who I once was friends with. All that said, there are some things I'd further like to address and expose from Jamie's recent Sunday stream.
Farmers market instead of EDC. Dude, I know. I actually LM actually got me a free VIP ticket, and I really wanted to go, but I have a lot of stuff going on right now, and yeah, I don't know, I stayed back instead. So hopefully next year I'll go, but I got to go to the farmers market with Kimmy, so that was fun. But literally, who am I? Who am I? All right, so first, I actually got this for free. Toilet paper! It was really funny because Kimmy and I had to go back to the farmer's market to get validation and parking validation and external validation. No, I'm kidding. But, okay. I have to return. Wait, does her bag smell like garlic now? No, it smells a little bit like thyme. Okay. And then I got a carrot card. I got a carrot card. Okay, I gotta return Kimmy's bag. But it does smell like thyme. Oh my gosh, I wanna go back. Everyone was so nice too. Oh, everyone's so nice. I am like a dog. I sniff everything. I actually don't realize how much I sniff things. I just sniff everything. I'm actually a dog. Okay, my kitchen's also really messy. Honestly, I've been going through it, guys. Did you have a good birthday week? Not really. I went through a lot this week, guys. I don't want to talk about it. I'm a man who isn't afraid to show emotions. Oh, that's good. Guys, I was talking about this with Kimmy. It's literally sassy man apocalypse. All the men are just so sassy right now. Also, my table might shake because I'm using my work table, which has wheels. So it kind of shakes a little bit. But I can't even name a single man that's not sassy. It's actually sassy man apocalypse. I feel because we encourage men to open up about their feelings, and now they're really sassy. They're just so sassy. Every man, even my brother is kind of sassy. No, not no, even masculine guys are sassy right now. I'm not even kidding. I think I think it's fine. I think with expressing yourself comes a little bit of sassiness. It's because I live in LA. Really? Is it just LA, guys? I don't know. My brother's kind of sassy. My younger brother, he's sassy. You guys question things now. And you guys have needs now. And you guys have boundaries. I mean, yeah, I love that for you guys, but it's just really funny. It's great for you guys though. It's just wow, it's really sassy man apocalypse. No, guys, I'm not talking about guys that I'm not talking about guys I date. I'm literally talking about even my guy friends are just sassy. They're all just sassy. But it's not a bad thing. It's just really funny. If you guys compare yourself to your dad, right? Don't you think you're more sassier? No? See, that's sassy for you to say. Like, that had a sassy tone. Like, you guys saying no has a sassy tone. Like, no cap. I said, oh, bless your heart the other day. That's cute. Oh, your dad is a smart ass. So your dad's just like really sassy. Your dad's just really sassy. I think you just think everything is sassy. No, no. I swear, guys. So sassy just defending your morals? Anyone with morals has a little sassy. See, that was sassy. Like, that was sassy. But guys, sassy's like not a bad thing. Is that not sassy? That was sassy, right? It is. Sassy's like, no, sassy's not bad. Like, I'm hella sassy. Like, sassy's not a bad thing. What is the meaning of sassy? It's like, I don't know. Can someone Google the definition? Because apparently my definition of sassy is like not sassy. But I'm a read between the lines person. Like, I can read vibes. So it might not be like directly sassy, but I think it's sassy. Cheeky. Yeah, cheeky man apocalypse. Yes, oh yes. Lively, bold, full of spirit. Cheeky. See, guys, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I think guys are just like, oh, I don't want to be sassy because it sounds feminine. But like, you know, statistically, you guys are more feminine right now, which is not a bad thing. But literally, we have like, I think, like for men, there's like 20% less testosterone in you guys right now. Not on average, not individually. But that's probably because humans are more sedentary right now. Like, you guys are sitting down at the desk and stuff. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being sassy. So, no, like, guys are doing well right now. Like, my guy friends like journal. Like, guys are journaling now. It's healthy to express your emotions. Like, I was like making fun of my friend. Like, Johnny, like, he journals, right? Like, we went to Coachella together. And like, I come out of my room and I'm about to make breakfast, and I see him on the couch and he has like a journal. I'm like, oh, what are you writing in there? He's like, oh, I'm journaling. Like, I've told myself I would journal like every single day for the last year. I was like, oh wow. And then I started making fun of him. Like, I was like, wait, so like, what do you journal about? Like, what do guys journal about? I feel like it's like, dear diary, today I went to the gym and I made a protein shake. And then I came home. And then I did some work. And then I played games on the PC. What? Your demons? Oh, okay. I want to see a guy's journal. God, I really want to read your guys' journal. Can I read your guys' journal? It's probably like, dear diary, I still think about her all the time. Will I ever find someone that makes me feel the way that she made me feel? Okay, I don't mean making fun of you guys, but like, I'm pretty sure like that's like in some of your guys' journal, right? Okay, so there's actually this, what I'm actually doing with you guys, I'm actually like technically flirting with you guys, because there's actually this, and I didn't know this existed, but I realized this, like, I do this all the time. People just want to be seen, and there's like a way, there's like a really charismatic thing that some people do, where you like tease someone in a way where it makes them feel seen. So for example, like I feel like what I just did was similar to that. I forgot what the phrase was, but I didn't know I did this until I read it somewhere, and I was like, oh wow, like I think this whole rule law thing, you know, I think it's a suggestion. You should, you know, I will fucking say, like, over the course of my life, I actually questioned if I was like not that good of a person, because there's people who just like follow rules or follow like what feels good, or they follow like what everyone else says is good or bad. And for me, I never cared about that. I was like, you know what, I personally do not approve of this, or I do approve of this, so I'm gonna follow that and stay grounded. And after the course of years, I realized I was actually the good person. Like, I'm the one with morals. And people who like follow the quota usually are just following what society's doing. Like, they're just like sheep. Anyways, that was my TED Talk. But yeah. I also just think like, I don't know, I feel like things are not that serious. I feel like it's just not that serious. Okay, actually, yeah, I got gaslit recently. Like, genuinely, recently I got gaslit. That was not fun. I was like, what? But the thing is, like, gaslighting is like, sometimes it's also like the perspective of someone else's feelings, right? So it's like, I don't know. So sometimes I feel like people are like, oh, you're gaslighting me, but they're just trying to like invalidate your feelings. But actually, I don't know anymore. I don't really care. I don't really know. Do you guys have any tea in your life? Can you guys like tell me the tea? I want to know about your guys' tea, like your lives. Yeah, you know, like I just don't. I think it's a red flag if someone is constantly being gaslit. Like they're like, oh my god, this person's gaslighting. Like I feel like if they say that all the time, like they're the delusional ones. Like they're the ones not in reality because they think that they're getting gaslit all the time. Would you do a Google Doc confession statement sometime? Probably not. I have no interest in ruining people's lives or exposing people. Because, oh my god, I actually took the Dark Court test and it made so much sense. I don't know if you guys know the Dark Court test. It tests you on like your narcissism, your entitlement, your Machiavellianism, your psychopathy, your sadism, it just tests how dark you are. And my spitefulness was like 3%. Like I'm not a very spiteful person. I would say maybe like 10%, but my entitlement was so high. It was like 80%. And that makes a lot of sense because I feel like I have a high self-worth, but not to the point, it's so high that I don't even want to waste time being spiteful. Like I feel inconvenienced when I have to be spiteful. So when I'm like angry and I feel spiteful, I'm like, ew! I don't want to like spend time like getting revenge or even thinking about that because it's a waste of my time. So I'm not really like that much of a spiteful person. But it's because it's a waste of time. So it's still in my benefit that I'm gonna stop talking.
Jamie starts talking about ditching EDC to go to a farmer's market with Kimmy. Jamie literally says, "Who am I?" indicating that she's explicitly admitting she feels a deep sense of having lost her own perception of identity to what she considers an extremely deeply disturbing extent, which she reinforces with the multiple times she says she's been having a really rough time recently. This loss of sense of real identity is something Jamie quite clearly appears to extremely heavily associate with Kimmy's involvement in her life, and some reason that forces Jamie to extremely desperately need to seek external validation for something simultaneously with Kimmy, further substantiating my assertion that Kimmy and Jamie were involved in some kind of pedophilic behavior that they've been conspiring and attempting to have me murdered to cover up their attention-seeking behavior through at my expense against my consent ever since that Toronto meetup I attended with them present over 8 years ago. With how Jamie literally explicitly said she's actually a dog, it seems that the reality is Kimmy conspired to murder Jamie through somehow representing her as Pix, which Kimmy later tried to misrepresent intentionally as Big Skanger and or Zakid to try to facilitate Jamie destiny swapping with him. This conspiracy to murder Jamie that Kimmy did through representing Jamie as Pix somehow is how Jamie then used to conspire to murder me through Kimmy and the meetup that Jamie clearly has in reality known all along I attended in reality just to meet Kimmy with the purest of intentions. But it's not my fault that I don't like Jamie as much as Jamie wishes and hallucinates that I would, and it's not my fault that Big Skanger has gotten himself involved in Grand Theft Auto roleplaying to the extent that he got dragged into this whole ordeal. I really don't know exactly what's behind this recurring pattern now of Jamie talking about sassy man apocalypse, but to me it seems Jamie's rather blatantly extremely dismissive of the needs, boundaries, and worthiness of having actual free will when it comes to the men in her life, and Kimmy appears to quite extremely strongly share this kind of extremely condescending, misandristic attitude. I really don't know for sure how this relates to their attitudes towards me, because I still find it extremely questionable both how they truly perceive me as well as how they portray themselves to perceive me to others, especially when it comes to truly respecting my gender identity and associated aspects of my presentation and existence that result. I don't believe for a moment that Jamie didn't know she's flirting with her audience when she says things like she did there, where she clearly did a flirty type thing that I find extremely hard to believe anyone would perceive as not flirting even at a much younger age. I feel like anyone even high school aged would clearly identify that kind of behavior as flirting, and Jamie's been exploiting that kind of behavior to claim she's teasing somehow, that she's supposedly trying to make me feel seen. In reality, all these years, I haven't even been paying attention to her flirty behavior that she was pretending made me feel seen. She's never made me feel seen, neither online nor in real life, only really given off extremely vicious suppression and sabotage vibes to me, which I just didn't know her well enough very early on to realize was the reality of what she was doing when she appeared to be easy to talk to at that meetup I attended with her present over 8 years ago. I don't find it necessary to comment on whether or not I have a personal journal, but what I will say is that if I did, it most certainly would not be expressing feelings for Jamie like she's talking about. And I also am not, never have been, and never will change my position no matter what Jamie might be writing about me in her journal if she has one. Again, I'm not flirting with her here. I'm exposing her for her involvement in extremely serious crimes against me. I had to do a bit more research to figure out exactly how to word things, but at this point, my understanding of law just keeps getting better every time I'm insulted with these criminals violating my life so badly that at this point, I already don't feel like an idiot when it comes to the law anymore, especially compared to people like Jamie with their attempts to sound deep while being so extremely fake. It's quite hard, at least certainly for me, to ignore that many people follow the law, much more so out of fear of repercussions than from a place of true moral conviction or integrity. But that doesn't mean the law is just a suggestion. All courts operate under statutory law and other legal frameworks appropriate to their jurisdiction. That legal environment can certainly become questionable, especially when administrative processes are combined with legal manipulation, often by bad faith actors whose actions may violate constitutional protections. These violations can remain unchecked, hidden behind layers of procedure, or protected by the influence of wealth and institutional power that can erode regulatory oversight. But there's a clear and important distinction between what is merely legal and what is lawful. The Constitution isn't just a suggestion. I'd say it's an extremely critical foundational document that defines and protects a dignified existence. While I often don't really focus too much on my exact word choice, and it's been that way for a very long time, I really get the feeling that a lot of these massive frauds really don't understand how powerful and strategically calculated and intentional my precise word choice sometimes really is. I mean, sure, if you're subhuman filth that doesn't care about being a serial killer, pedophile, psychopath narcissist with zero real morals, dignity, integrity, and decency, then existence itself is just a suggestion. But that sentiment equates to Jamie telling me to commit suicide for her comfort, as she actively contributes to an ongoing conspiracy and attempts to murder me, and that's just a suggestion. Even if she has some kind of explanation, she's clearly refusing to communicate it adequately clearly and address this podcast and all the crimes against me that I'm exposing her and her associates and others for being involved in. So I'd say it's far from unreasonable for me to assert it's most likely because she knows she's actually largely at fault with demonstrable, intentional, extreme malice towards me that I objectively don't deserve at all and never have and never will.